Two trucks, same size, same price, but two very different ideas of what a two-wheel drive RC monster truck should be. In this corner, we have the brand new Arrma Quake, and in this corner, we have the latest version of the venerable Traxxas Stampede. Which one's gonna take the title of the ultimate two-wheel drive basher truck today? We're gonna find out. This freshly released Arrma Quake is built on the original Gorgon chassis. Its 223S has a big motor and can do up to 50 miles an hour right out of the box. And to go head-to-head with it, I chose the latest version BL2S Stampede. There is a VXL3S version of this, but I chose the BL2S because it's the exact same price as the new Quake. As you can see, these trucks are fairly similar in size. The Quake is just a little bit longer in wheelbase. They're nearly identical in height, with the Stampede being slightly taller. And they're very similar in width, with the larger tires of the Quake making it just a little bit wider than the Stampede is. The chassis on the Stampede is a slightly higher center of gravity, so it has a little bit better ground clearance in the middle. However, the significantly larger tires on the Quake give it a higher effective ground clearance in the front and in the rear. These Talon tires that are on the Stampede have been around for quite a while, and they're kind of starting to show their age. While on the other hand, these unlabeled Arrma tires look pretty modern, and I like the wheels on them quite a bit better. I personally think the lower profile kind of chrome rims date the design of this. And as you can see, the tires on the Quake are quite a bit bigger in diameter, though the Traxxas tires are a tiny bit wider. One really notable difference is that the Traxxas runs on 12mm hexes, while the Quake runs on more modern 14mm units. These 14mm hexes, while still plastic, are going to be stronger simply because they're larger and the flats are larger, which is a big advantage for the Quake. Now, of course, how these tires look is completely subjective, and we're just going to have to find out how they perform when we take these things out and bash them head to head. Before we do any of that, though, we've got some work we need to do to this Quake, because in our last video, we did a bunch of upgrades to it, and that makes it not even close to a fair fight. Before we work on it, we need to take off this body. On the Quake, the body's held on by these sliding under clips, and on the Stampede, it's held on with little tabs underneath each one of the fenders. Let me know down in the comments which clipless body system you prefer. I think the Traxxas one might be slightly better, but where I think the Quake is going to walk all over the Stampede is in body durability. As you can see, the entire back of this Quake is hard plastic, as is a big portion of the front. That hard plastic ties directly into those body mounts, and the Quake has a center body support. The Stampede has none of those things, and while it is a traditionally good-looking body, as you can see in the back and in the front especially, it's pretty weak. I expect this thing to get beaten up relatively quickly. Again, we'll just have to find out though. Removing the upgraded parts we did in the initial review video is going to give us a great opportunity to compare them. This is the upgraded steel rear differential and steel and aluminum drive shafts we put in. Getting to those took exactly 4 screws and pushing out a single pin. We're also going to remove this giant steel intermediate gear here. To get to the other side of that, we need to pull this cover off, which also lets us remove the upgraded slipper clutch. We're going to go ahead and put the stock one of these back in, again, just to make things fair. But now with just one more screw and one more pin, the drivetrain on this thing's pretty much completely taken apart. Now, I suspect getting to the drivetrain on this is going to be a bit more complicated, but I'm not going to lie, it's been a while since I've messed with one of these two-wheel drive Stampede chassis. That gets the rear skid and wheelie bar off, and with just those two parts, we've already exceeded the number of screws it took to get the entire rear drivetrain out of the Quake. Though fortunately, with just 2 more screws and a single proprietary connector, the whole rear module comes right off of there. Removing that module highlights a major difference between these two trucks. The Traxxas chassis is built in 3 different sections, with a front module, the center area, and then the rear module. The rear module contains the transmission, which is hanging off the back of the truck behind the rear wheels. The Arrma, on the other hand, uses one single chassis that's actually split longitudinally, though you never really have to split it for normal maintenance, and it uses a mid-mounted motor in front of the wheels. Whether a mid-mounted motor or a rear-mounted motor is better is probably a subjective thing, though we'll see how they turn out when we bash them. Underneath this cover is the Traxxas slipper clutch. As you can see, Traxxas uses a much finer gear pitch for their gears. The ones on the Arrma are mod 0.8, and I believe these are 32P. The larger the gear tooth profile, the stronger the gears are, which isn't to say that this is going to be a problem, but they are inherently weaker. Like pretty much every 1/10 scale vehicle from Traxxas in the last 15 years, this has the infamous Ultra shocks. These shocks are okay, but the shock caps are pretty weak and tend to pop off and usually need to be upgraded pretty quickly. And when you hold them up to the shocks that come on the Quake, they do look pretty anemic. These shocks have shock shaft protectors built into them. The lower shock eyes are quite a bit larger. The shafts are the exact same size at about 3 millimeters in diameter, but the shock bodies are definitely larger on the Arrma. These Arrma shocks load from the bottom, which is kind of unique. The Traxxas ones are pretty standard, loading right from the top here. These are standard bladder style shocks and they do appear to be filled pretty well. Overall, while the shocks on neither one of these trucks are particularly advanced, I think I'd give the nod to Arrma, as they do tend to hold up better, and I think most people will agree with that. The one place the Traxxas shocks do have an advantage is that the upper and lower balls are steel as opposed to plastic. This will last a little bit longer, but again, with the reputation of the rest of these shocks, I'm not really sure that's much of an advantage. Those shocks attach to arms that do appear fairly similar at first, but there's one big difference between these arms. Whereas the Quake is using these big, beefy inner hinge pins, Traxxas is using these screw-type hinge pins, which are a lot thinner and tend to unscrew themselves when you're bashing. This is by far a superior design, and the Arrma also captures the arms better than the Traxxas does. These axle shafts are also fairly similar, though again, the Arrma is just a little bit bigger. The latest VXL version of these trucks do come with a much better axle shaft, one that I think would even be superior to this Arrma one, but this is what the BL2S version comes with. Something else I forgot to mention is on these axles, the pins that actually connect the hexes are only 2 millimeters in diameter on the Traxxas. That is a 0.5 millimeter smaller than what you get on the Arrma, and that could be a problem, especially if you're running bigger tires. In order to get inside here, we're gonna have to keep going, and that means taking this body mount off, then the shock tower off, then I think we can get it split apart. These new body mounts are reasonably durable, and I don't think we're going to have any problem with this, especially given the weight of the truck. And I personally do think these body mounts are superior to the Arrma version. If you've had experience with both of them or either one, let me know your thoughts on them, or do you prefer a regular clip? And with all those screws out and removing a piece of tape, I believe we can finally get this transmission split apart. As you can see in here, we do have a 3-gear transmission, and these are all steel gears. Though pulling one of these sintered steel gears out and contrasting it to what you get in the Quake, I think the Quake might win this one. Now, that's not to say this is going to be a problem. These gears may be perfectly strong enough, especially for the power this truck has, and that's really all that matters. Now, if you're a Stampede fan, don't worry, it's not all bad news, as the Stampede does have some places where it takes the advantage, though this differential probably isn't going to be one of them. As you can see, the Arrma differential is substantially larger. And even though both differentials are grease-filled planetary style differentials, this one is not sealed, so it can't be filled with fluid. Also, out of the box, the Traxxas differential isn't quite as smooth as the Arrma unit. Now, before I forget where everything goes, let me get this transmission put together, and let's take a closer look at this BL2S motor. While this motor is brushless, this particular unit is 3300 kV. It's pretty small for a brushless motor. The can includes a fan in the front and a circuit board in the back, so the motor itself is only about this long. And while it is 36 millimeters in diameter, which is the same diameter as the motor in the Quake, the internal motor rotor dimensions are going to be quite a bit smaller. Now, unfortunately, despite my best efforts, and by best efforts I mean using the wrong screwdriver to try to take these screws out, I did strip these little Phillips heads out. They are thread locked in, so we're not going to be looking inside this motor, but this is a pretty standard 3660 motor, and there's not going to be much to see in here. What we do get, though, is a 5mm shaft as opposed to a 1/8 inch shaft on this motor, and I do suspect this motor will last longer than this one will, and it also gets a cooling advantage with an external fan. With that being said, depending on how you look at it, what's powering that motor might or might not be an advantage for the Quake. Because even though the Quake has an ESC that's capable of running on 3S and has built-in stability control, the Stampede has something a lot of you guys want, and that's a separate receiver. And that means if you want to use your own radio, it's as easy as just swapping this receiver out, and you don't have to worry about swapping out the ESC or vice versa. One confusing thing about the TQ receivers on some of these Traxxas cars is why they have such a long antenna on them still. This antenna length is a throwback to the old crystal-based systems, and it really isn't necessary anymore, but they still do it on their cheaper trucks. To go along with that, you get the very basic TQ transmitter. This thing has steering adjustment, and that's pretty much it. It does have a foam wheel, but it's quite a bit less fully featured than what you get on the Quake. This thing has steering adjustment, steering dual rate, adjustable throttle limit, and like I said, that 4-way adjustable dynamic stability control, which is the same thing as Traxxas stability management that you get on their higher end systems with the TQI receiver system. Traxxas also gives you a nice full color manual, as well as some preload spacers and a few basic tools. And whereas the manual for the Quake is in black and white, you do get a much more useful set of tools with it, which I would take over the color manual any day. Next to that patented waterproof receiver box, as you can see, we've got the BL2S ESC, and then the battery compartment's right here. The battery compartment on the Quake is an area of concern for some people, especially when you're trying to fit a 3S battery. The wiring also goes in here, and sometimes things can interfere. Even though the wiring's easier to manage on here because it's out in the open, because the battery goes up underneath this little tray, there really isn't much more room here than there is on the Quake. Now, before I get too confused about what parts go where, let me get the back end of this thing put back together, then let's see how the front compares. One advantage I was reminded of on the Stampede is it does have an adjustable wheelie bar. Unfortunately, this wheelie bar does tend to come apart in bashing, so I'm not sure everyone's going to consider that to be an advantage over the fixed but probably more durable wheelie bar that comes on the Quake. Both the Stampede and the Quake use a similar servo saver in servo horn design, but the servos themselves are quite different. The Stampede is using the venerable 2056 Traxxas servo, and while this thing is nice and waterproof, if we take a look inside, by the way, while I'm taking these screws out, we have a huge giveaway coming when we hit 50,000 subscribers, so if you want to make sure that happens as fast as possible, go ahead and get subscribed and hit that bell to get notified so you make sure you win when we do the giveaways. But back to the servo with those screws out, we can see it's a pretty basic brushed servo here on the bottom. This does look well made. However, on the top, it's all plastic ears in here. To contrast that with the servo you get on the Quake, of course, we have to take this one out, and this is one place where it's a little bit more difficult to actually work on than on the Stampede, as you do have to remove this shock tower in order to get to it. This does, however, give us the opportunity to compare the shock towers. As you can see on the Quake, the shocks are held in double shear. Basically, double shear just means when the screw goes in, it's supported on both sides. That means when you pull on it, you're pulling straight as opposed to at an angle. On the Stampede, the shocks are in single shear, so it's actually just trying to bend the head of the screw back and forth. This shock tower is also quite a bit taller and more flexible. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as flexibility can lead to strength. Again, that's something we're just gonna have to find out when we bash it. The servo horn, knuckles, and arms are also all in double shear on the Quake, and for the most part, that's all single shear on the Stampede. Now, taking this servo out, I'm a little confused about what other people were having problems with, other than the screws being a little bit buried and the servo horn being a bit shrouded by the chassis. It's really not that hard, though I will admit it is harder than the one on the Stampede. However, what you'll see here is, as opposed to the Stampede, while this is also a waterproof servo, you've got metal gears in it, which means this thing's gonna last at least a little bit longer than the one on the Stampede and won't be something you have to throw away immediately. Will we have to throw the one on the Stampede away immediately? I'm not sure. Enough talk. Let's get these things slammed back together and go see how they perform. All right, first things first, let's make sure we can still get the same speed out of the Quake. We got 47 miles an hour before, and we were wheelie limited. A couple people pointed out that I probably could get faster if I had a little bit more room, and that's absolutely true, but this is a reasonable amount of room that most people are gonna have to bash in, and yeah, I think we're gonna be able to get about the same speed here. Wheeling isn't quite as much of a problem as it was before. Full throttle. Okay, yeah, I actually think we're gonna be able to go a little bit faster. Maybe this battery isn't quite as charged. I did charge it all the way up though. One more pass. Full throttle. Let's see what we got. All right, and it looks like we got, yeah, right at 50 miles an hour, so just exactly what they claimed. Nice. Okay, same thing with the Stampede. We have a fully charged 2S battery this time. It is a good quality SMC battery. Of course, this thing can only do 2S, so I expect it to be quite a bit slower. Traxxas says 40 miles an hour. Of course, what they say and what they get usually isn't the same, and this definitely doesn't feel like 40 miles an hour, though it doesn't feel particularly slow either. We're definitely not having problems with it being wheelie limited though. That is full throttle. Let's go full throttle one more time. And let's see what we got out of it. Now, in spite of this thing not having any stability control, it does feel pretty stable. Having less power plays a big part in that. And as you can see, we got 29 miles an hour. Will this thing do wheelies? Yeah, it will. Let's see. Oh yeah, it'll do little wheelies, but it doesn't quite have the power to hold them. Even if I get on full throttle, it will drop after just a second. This does feel pretty friendly and approachable, though it does like to swap ends when you hit the brakes, and that's not something I really felt with the other truck. Hard surface bashing was the first place this thing really impressed me. It's super duper stable, and even though it can roll over, because of the design of the truck body, it does like to end up on its roof, and it really doesn't like rolling over either. It's also a wheelie machine with the amount of power this thing has on 3S. It'll wheelie as much as you want, and it'll also balloon those tires pretty hard. Because of these big tires, even in this fairly thick mowed grass, this two-wheel drive truck does pretty darn well. I've seen a lot of two-wheel drive trucks not do nearly as well in this kind of terrain, and this thing handles it without any trouble whatsoever. I suspect we're gonna have a lot more trouble with the Stampede than what we're having here. This thing handles it no problem whatsoever, and this is a huge advantage of a truck like the Quake. If you've got some fairly tall grass in your yard, it is just not gonna be a problem. Dirt is a similar story. These tires really love the dirt. They can kick up some good roost, and in general, this thing feels very stable, very planted, and I really, really love this thing. This is definitely my favorite two-wheel drive vehicle in the dirt, and it really does match a lot of four-wheel drive vehicles in stability and fun. Now, trying the Stampede in the same fairly tall mode grass, you can see it's struggling a lot more. It definitely can do it, but the smaller tires really do slow it down, and especially when it's getting into that dead grass, it's really bogging down. Again, it's doing it, but it's just getting through it, and I don't think you'd really have a lot of fun with it. So you're definitely going to want reasonably short grass, and oh, there we go. See, it just got stuck, and it is completely stuck. Hard surface, concrete, and asphalt performance for the Stampede is actually pretty good. These tires don't have a ton of grip, so it does tend to not want to roll over when you turn, though braking is definitely harder to do. It wants to flip over, roll around, and just generally misbehave when you really get on the brakes. That's pretty typical for two-wheel drive trucks. Now, on the dirt and short grass is where the Stampede really feels like it's at home. It definitely handles a lot better than on hard surfaces. The lower power really does make it fairly easy to control, though it's definitely not as much fun as the Quake is, and it still doesn't really control well when you really slam on the brakes and wants to swap ends. I don't know what they do with the Quake to make it not do that. Maybe it's that mid-mount motor, but I don't know enough about two-wheel drive to know for sure. Let me know down in the comments if you have the answer to that. Now, the next thing we need to see is just how durable are these things and how well do they jump. Before we try out the Stampede, let's give ourselves a quick reminder of what the Quake is like. It's already pretty wild. It'll almost self-right, but not quite. Wait a minute. No, not quite. I have to say, especially on 3S, you need to have a judicious trigger finger if you want to get these jumps right, because it has a ton of power, and as you can see here, double backflip, bam! It can definitely put that power down and make use of it. I don't know if we're gonna see backflips on the Stampede. This thing does doubles with ease and gets good height, comparable to a lot of four-wheel drive trucks. This thing is absolutely wild, and you do have to be careful. And we almost stuck it on end. But I personally think that's a good thing. Being able to turn it down and go slower if you want to, but then being able to turn it up and go absolutely wild is really fun. And this thing is just that. It is really, really fun. And now finally, let's see what this Stampede's really capable of. Big jump. Nope, not really gonna be a big jump so far. This thing is definitely not getting the traction in this grass that we saw with the other truck. Although it is doing decent wheelies though, I think having that motor in the rear definitely helps with the lower power and the ability to do wheelies. Let's see if we can get a backflip out of it. Nope, no backflip. It did land on its wheels though, which is nice. Get a jump off this ramp. Yeah, we're just not really getting the air. Ignore that big adapter chain hanging out the side. That's not the truck's doing, that's my doing. Yeah, we just don't really have the power to do anything super exciting. I mean, it is jumping, it is landing, it does do wheelies. Let's see if we can get a little bit more speed up. Ah, yeah, it just really can't get around. And that's a lack of power and wheel speed combined with these smaller tires that aren't really ballooning that much. It just doesn't have that exciting potential that the extra power of the other truck does. I will say though, its lightweight is definitely keeping things from getting broken. I'm hearing some crunching from that body, but there's no actual damage to it yet. I do suspect long term the body would get damaged more quickly than on the Quake, even though this thing isn't jumping nearly as high and it can't crash nearly as hard. When you've got something that's got low power like this, it kind of makes it inherently more durable because you can't go as high, you can't go as hard, and you can't go as fast. Almost got a full backflip there. I think if we had a little bit more traction in this grass, we could get a full backflip out of it, though we're definitely not seeing the double backflips we saw on the Quake. Almost a full backflip. You can stay on the gas there because you're gonna hit the front tires first and they're not powered, but definitely don't stay on the gas when landing a jump unless you know what you're doing. Let's try that one more time. Full throttle, nope. And of course, we're not gonna be self-righting with this. All right, let's try to get one more big jump out of this thing and then wrap it up. Right on the roof. It
is off.
So there we go, guys. Traxxas Stampede versus the Arrma Quake, and I think the winner of this battle is pretty clear. The Quake is faster, more powerful, handles better, probably is more durable overall, and is just a better car. And that's not really a surprise because this Stampede was introduced in 1994, and other than a few minor changes over the years, it's largely the same as it always has been. The basic chassis layout is very similar to the original, and the complexity of working on it is from 1994. Conversely, this Quake is built on the Gorgon platform, and it came out just a couple years ago, and it really shows when you go to work on this thing. I do want to clear up one misconception. This is not the Granite Voltage platform. It looks very similar, but basically nothing on it is compatible, and it was completely redesigned when it became the Gorgon platform. This platform does have a few minor niggles. One of the big ones is this battery compartment. It's a little bit tight, but as you can see, I've got a 3S battery in here with 3 adapters, and it's working just fine. One tip to get batteries to fit better is to cut the tabs off the front and back of this door. With those tabs on, when you fold the door in, it tends to jam up on the battery and the wire. And if you're running a battery that isn't a regular Spectrum battery, cutting those off makes a big difference. Now, that's not to say the Stampede has no redeeming qualities. Some people might like the body style better. It's more traditional truck style. I think this clipless system is better. You do get a separate ESC and receiver. And for someone who's been in the hobby for a long time, the nostalgia factor definitely is there. This is old and it feels old, which can be kind of cool sometimes. Another nice thing is if you're a beginner, this BL2S system has an approachable amount of power. Of course, you can turn the power down on the Quake, but this already has less power, which can be better sometimes. And Traxxas did recently lower the price on this, so it's now 20 bucks cheaper than the Quake, which isn't nothing. With that being said though, if you want to get a 2-wheel drive monster truck, spend the extra 20 bucks and get the Quake. I think you'll be much, much happier with it in the long run. And speaking of being happy, I'd be thrilled if you checked out one of these videos next.